just before we get into the talk, I want to talk to you a little bit about who I am and what I do, where I work for, and just a little personal things about me. I work as a mid-level UI engineer for a company called SalesLoft, Atlanta-based. You may have heard some of our speakers already, Ray Giswaldo. I work at SalesLoft creating UI components that build integrations between different CRMs like Microsoft Dynamics, Salesforce, and our new one that we're going to be implementing is HubSpot. I mostly just dabble in React. I don't really leave my comfort space. React is like really where I stay. But I do have some of the services that we build to bridge things to Microsoft Dynamics is already built in Elixir. So I kind of learned Elixir so that I could like review my my coworkers' PRs and stuff. So been learning a little bit more about that. I also co-organize React Robins, which was previously known as React Ladies. We recently did a name change so that we could be more inclusive towards women and also people who identify as non-binary. I co-organize that with Monica Powell and Shonday Person. I have a 7-year-old boy, pretty awesome, energetic. Actually, on the first day of ConnectTech, he actually fractured his pinky in karate. So I was kind of stressed out. I didn't know if I was going to be able to do the talk, but he's going to have surgery, but it's going to be sometime next week. Other things about me is that I'm very passionate about astrology and philosophy. I have been studying astrology for almost about 6 to 7 years. I could also probably call myself an astrologer, aside from tech. So if you do decide to follow me on Twitter, just know that I barely ever talk about tech. I only like talking about tech when I'm at work or when I come to these conferences and stuff because I love speaking about these topics. But overall, Twitter, you will barely catch me talking about tech ever, mostly about astrology. So what we're here today, refactoring your way up. So we are going to talk a little bit about how to find opportunities in a code base when you work in a new company, or, you know, could be really useful for especially people who are just entering tech as an entry-level developer, junior developers, or just especially if you are a senior engineer and you mentor other junior developers and you're trying to figure out how to get them to level up, this is going to be really useful. But overall in your career, so there's going to be some good takes in here. So we're going to just overall talk about some points that you can use to get to know your legacy code base. Most of the times when we enter companies, we do enter something that's already been built and has probably been built a long time ago. We're going to find opportunities that we can improve on and figure out how to find patterns of debugging, maintenance, and then figuring out how to find out security issues. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about my personal project and what kind of tools I use to advance and kind of get better at. Because I went from Angular 1.6 and we were refactoring all the way to React. So yeah, we had a bit of a big bridge to kind of go on to make sure that we can refactor properly. And then we're going to talk about some points about how you can leverage all that you've learned in all this and take it to your manager so that you can provide a good, evidence that, look, I'm good enough to be promoted to mid-level. I'm good to be promoted to senior and stuff. And get yourself a raise, especially if you haven't gotten one this year. So before we get into all of that, I just want to talk to you a little bit about my personal project and what I kind of do. So I build UI components that kind of bridge the data between CRMs like Microsoft Dynamics, Salesforce, into our own platform. And there's certain settings, a lot of settings actually, that kind of users use on a daily basis in order to make sure that their data is being transferred correctly. And so there is a lot of these components use almost the same API calls. And as we were transferring things from Angular 1.6 to React, we were slowly making changes, but we weren't looking at it as a whole. We were looking at it as individual parts. And so when you're refactoring and you look at individual parts, you kind of miss a couple things. And so biggest problem that I had seen, and I was kind of the reason why it was happening, is repeated network calls that were all the same based off of the same functions I was using over and over. And so I kind of was like, oh shit, I've got to fix this problem, because as a UI engineer, I was the only one between two CRM teams. And so I had to be able to, direct what we were going to do on the front end in regards to make sure that we can have the proper performance happening on here. And so once I figured out this was happening, I kind of was like, I was kind of like the blind leading the blind. But when I found out, I was kind of like, okay, this is where we got to start. We've got to start fixing these issues. So now we're going to jump into getting to know your legacy code base. So as I was kind of getting into figuring out how to figuring out what part of a project I want to work on and take ownership on, I was figuring out that I need to actually identify patterns of how we usually do things when we're refactoring into React. And so we usually use the React component in order to plug it into the Angular when we don't want to refactor an entire page of Angular. And then there were other processes that we wanted to look at in regards to how to debug. I'm a console.log lover, but I've also learned that debugger is probably really helpful, but it's helpful to know what are the different states after that when you're using that. And then overall, when I started learning how to finally use the code base or overall read the code base, I started having to think about how to maintain it. So there were a lot of things in regards to updating our packages. There were things that we no longer needed anymore because we have a library, internal library, where we can go ahead and reuse those components over and over. And so there were a lot of services that we no longer needed, but so it was like pretty much dead code. So removing a lot of dead code was really helpful. And so a lot of these issues also had to be prioritized, and lots of the times we have them in our backlog or in a backlog of our mind. And so in order to prioritize these, I actually took more to, prioritizing them in Jira tickets, creating epics and stuff. And so, because most of the time, you know that there's something you have to fix, something you have to maintain your code base, but you don't actually talk about it until it gets to grooming, but it doesn't get to grooming until you've created a ticket for it. You've created a sense of purpose for something that you want to go ahead and start maintaining. And as you know, Angular 1.6 is no longer supported, so we kind of had like a little bit of security issues amongst that, and that's why we have like a company initiative in order to change it out to React. Before it was where only our UI engineers had this initiative, and rather than be a company-wide type of worry, it was mostly just heavy on the UI engineers to worry about it. And then it became where we started like letting them know, like now this has become a huge issue and we need to get this going, and we need more than just the UI engineers to worry about it. So our security issues were really important in regards to getting Angular 1.6 out of the code base. So this leads into some of the times when we are writing code and we want to maintain things. You never want to be a Chris, but we do have a lot of Chris's in our companies. They build something, all of how it works is only in their mind, and they didn't leave any documentation behind. And so as I work on this new project, I do feel like I have a sense of duty, a sense of purpose in order to make it better, write the documentation and on how it works and how you can maintain it further. And so I know a lot of people build things, they just move on and they move on to the next company, and then that's it. The person who picks it up, that's who's left with it. So yeah, I just overall felt like this tweet is very relatable to a lot of people. Okay, so next part, we're just gonna go ahead and look at looking for opportunities in your code base as you start figuring out what's in there. In my case, I had a lot of repeating API network calls. What you're gonna probably find is different parts, not different parts of your team, but different parts of your department are probably making the same functions over and over, and you're not even realizing it because there's no communication between two different teams that are doing two different things. And so overall, I've started to see that even though I was the only UI engineer on two different teams, I don't really get to see what the other people are building out unless they send me a PR and stuff. And so during those times, I started to see that this was an issue. Lots of the times you will find different parts of your app have performance issues, and that is such a great way to start measuring those things, especially when you're looking into the browser and you start using the performance tab or using the React performance to start measuring how things are slow. We have a big customer like IBM, and IBM has a lot of data. When we demo things and IBM showcases all this data and our stuff is moving fast, that's how we know we've built something really great, because knowing that this particular team or customer that we worked with has already a lot of data and we're already building things that are accustomed to working to making things faster, we know we're gonna make them happy. But doesn't mean that we didn't start somewhere in a low place before. So always a great place to find within your app that you can own to improve performance. Overall, when you're building, like I said before, documentation has been really important to figure out how things work. Lots of the times, a lot of people are like, what's the point of building documentation? Nobody reads it. But at the end, when that person who does have all that knowledge is gone and the only thing they did leave is documentation, people will be forced to read it. And I know lots of the times there's that question, well, who maintains the documentation? Kelsey Hightower once tweeted that documentation is a feature. And I think that mentality is so important to keep in regards to documentation, because we look at documentation as just another menial task that we need to do, but we never do because we don't put it as a JIRA ticket. And so something that I've started an initiative on my team is if I need to add documentation, especially with new pages that I'm refactoring, a documentation card is going to be really important, not just for myself or my future self, but also have QA engineers who might come onto the team who are new and don't know how certain things work. Documentation for them is going to be really important, how to test those components. So that's what I've been doing now as I've been refactoring some of my pages. And then as we go into here, when you are refactoring, you guys don't want to reinvent the wheel when there's so many great libraries out there, especially good open source libraries that are being maintained with great documentation too. So this takes me back to my slide for React and Friends, which is actually just a short way of saying React and third-party libraries, because there's a couple libraries that you'll need in order to use with React. Some of the things that I use to build out some of the service is React Query. If you have not used React Query, it is so great. I didn't understand the power of it until I started using it more and more, but it is a data fetching library where you can cache data as well, update, and it follows things based off of a certain query or a key that you attach to it. And I didn't get that concept until I started updating things, and I was like, I had two different components that don't even communicate with each other, like they're nowhere related, but I needed them to affect each other, and based off of when I updated something, it updated that other one, and I got free work without having to create another JIRA card to figure out how I'm gonna how to connect them both so that there's updated data. And then TypeScript. I am not an avid user of TypeScript, but when I created my service, I had to use it. Or more so, like I found the opportunity. It's not really pressured at work to use TypeScript, but we do have senior engineers who are more reliant on it because it's really great overall to check your types and stuff. And it gets rid of all the default props that you're trying to set when you don't know if something's going to be required or not for prop types. And overall for TypeScript, when you document well with TypeScript, you can actually, when you hover over something, you need to figure out what is actually coming from that data. It comes back to you right there in right click, right when you're like hovering over a variable or something. And so that really goes well with documentation overall. Some other libraries, we use style components for anything whenever we are styling things over. Usually the components that we have and pick and choose are already styled, but if we need to make any changes overall with spacing, we do use style components. I love style components, especially when it comes to theming. I'm always figuring out how to debug things with style components. I figure it's very user-friendly. For forms, we use React Final Form. It's not like defined that this is the one we should use, but it's definitely something that I've normally used just because it's there already within our code base, and I try to make sure to maintain it and make sure we're updating anything on it. based on version numbers. And then we test our UI components with React testing library or the DOM testing library with React. I hope you guys went to Kenzie's talk. Pretty awesome that he's here. So we're going to talk about how we can actually use all these things that you've learned in regards to learning your code base, figuring out an area of the code base that you want to own, and then how you can take that to your manager and start leveraging that. I think lots of the times when we're a junior developer, we just want to learn. But what you're not understanding is that you're actually creating yourself opportunities, and you want to go ahead and talk to your manager about all that you've learned. And if you've decided to take ownership of something, that's a great opportunity to talk to your manager, let them know, like, look, I did this, I did that. If you're a person that is waiting for recognition, you can do that if you like, if that's what you prefer, but you could be waiting all day for that recognition when you could be talking about it already in your one-on-ones. When you take ownership of an area, the idea is not that is the only you get to code in it, but rather you take ownership, you provide the documentation, and you encourage others to code with you along with it. It just gives that opportunity for like, oh, my Adrianna built that, so she can go ahead and tell you more about it, and you can start writing code for it. And so it just leads for really great ideas to, in the future, if you want to lead a project, it's going to lead to more opportunities to lead for that project. And of course, when you take ownership of something in your code base, you have the ability to take that experience, dumb it down, and put it and talk it to a community in a meetup or a conference just like this. And I found that can be really helpful in regards to your career. And overall, this is, if you have any senior engineers or any senior or team leads that you guys are trying to figure out how to like get your junior developer to level up, this is going to be really great to remind them, find an area of the app that you like and you want to take ownership of, and you want to start leading on projects. My project started off based off of when I was just a junior developer and they told me pick a project, and I was like, okay, I picked one. I finished a project, but it never got released. But then I got put on a team that had something to do with it, and I was like, look, I already built this. I can rebuild it and make it better because I already know about it. And so you just find more opportunities that way. And this tweet by Tom about leveling up, resolving ambiguity is one of the harder skills to develop. And so I think I've gotten better and better at building things because of experience. And so the fact that I had to build out a service that other people will use, and then in that service, I use React Query. I was able to now know how something works and reuse it over again so that I can make my code better. So I think this is like really important to understand about overall when you are trying to figure out how to take ownership of something in regards to refactoring and making it better along with documentation. It's going to give you all these opportunities. That is the end of my talk. Does anybody have any questions? All right, dead silence. Oh, wait, question. So resolve ambiguity, it takes down from breaking down work to begin with. You have to start somewhere, right? And you don't know I didn't know how something worked until I collaborated with other people who already had experience with it, or I had to look through other code bases to figure out how it worked to begin with. So one, it started there for me to maybe reading code, but if I didn't understand the code, I would get help, collaborate with somebody about it, and then I would start writing the tickets about where I had to start. And then that's where grooming comes in. Hopefully, your company does grooming in order to look at a card and look at the task that you want to change, and then going into the code while tasking and figuring out what needs to change in that process. When we were doing with Angular, I had to scrap everything from Angular, but I had to figure out how to rework everything using the API network calls. And so if also recognizing patterns within the code that you feel like can be better or more performant is also going to be helpful as well, and then figuring and decide if you want to bring in a third-party libraries without reinventing the wheel and making work harder for you as well. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes?
Do you have any strategy about updating like NPM dependencies? Like you run an NPM audit fix and you see different things you need to fix. How do you communicate that to the PM, communicate to the business, and let that get prioritized? What was some of your experience?
So your PM wants a reason, right? They want to know why you want to waste this time, before you waste all this money, right? So I have found ways to figure out if it's a version number that is no longer going to be protected, or like whatever's new on the new version numbers. Is it going to make the developer experience better, or is it going to enhance the way we code? Is it going to make development time go quicker? If it makes development time quicker, that means they love that when things go quick, when it goes on their time. That's another way. Another thing is, I wouldn't say certain things end up breaking, and so you could talk about what ends up happening when this no longer works properly the way we want it to. What errors are coming up related to that NPM package that needs to be updated. And so it just takes a little bit of research. You can also find alternatives to an NPM package if you don't want to update it, but rather change out the package as well, and then see what that new package has and what dependencies is on that package, so that in the future there'll be less maintainability about it, because there's other child dependencies that are not affecting it the way that a current package is. Sorry. Yes?
Same topic. I guess like when is your like the point where you're like, okay, I'm just gonna let this ride instead of like spending all this time refactoring, let's say an entire code base to something much more modern. Like what? I guess like, yeah.
Can you ask that question a different way? Sorry.
Say I have this super old code base, and then like, okay, if I spend a month refactoring this to something, I don't know, this back into like Nest instead of like really nasty Node and Express with like 10 different patterns on it. But yeah, it's gonna take a month. But I mean, a month might be too long. It might take too much money. Like, I guess, what's your thought process when you need to like weigh that?
Is there ways to break it apart rather than doing it all in one bit? Can you start with something? What we have at our company is we have feature flags. So if we can't do an entire part, we do small parts and we break it down with feature flag. Sometimes we end up in feature flag hell, but that's a different conversation. But overall, like, I know sometimes we look at things and we look at it as a whole, but that whole can be broken down. At least I hope so, can be broken down into small parts. What's a part that you can start at now that moves the marker just a little bit more? And then sometimes it does take tasking, kind of boring things that we have to do, our Jira tickets and stuff. And like, this is the part that should go first because this depends on that and that depends on that. And so it's just the best question is like finding that way to make it smaller. Like that's the biggest part that we have in our career. We have a hard time just stop taking a big bite and take small bites and stuff. That would be the only thing that I can think of. But if I think of something else, I'll let you know. Yes?
You mentioned documentation, documentation, how the system works. I found if you have a good set of automated tests, that's your documentation.
Oh, a good set of tests? Test documentation.
So automated tests that show that all the stuff is working. Don't need documentation because it does show you this is how it works, this is what it does.
So how do you know that the tests aren't brittle? What if the tests are brittle?
You write tests that show this is how it behaves, not how it's implemented. The implementation, you're saying, oh, when I do this low-level thing should happen. That's a little test because it's great. But if you say, when I call this method, I should get this result. That's not a real test. No matter what you do internally, it's not going to break them because it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's returning what you expect it to return.
That's a good point in regards to doing testing, using testing as documentation, and it is very reliant only to developers who run these tests. But something that I'd like to think is to be more inclusive to documentation, especially around our QA engineers. Our specifically in our team or company, our QA engineers don't look at our tests specifically. They do manual testing. So when a new QA engineer comes on, they don't look at our tests. They don't run our tests. That's only based on developers. And so we use documentation to try to let them know. We also have like a knowledge base for customer facing incidents, but more so of how to test on the UI is what we try to where we have wording for documentation. And I know it's killer because you have to write the code and then you have to write in words how this actually works. And it's kind of like, what's a better way to do that? And I think the better way to do that nowadays is with Typescript overall, because there's just so much information on there. But again, that leads away to another thing in regards to when you have a QA engineer or overall another person who comes onto the team. Tests are good. Sometimes I just get afraid that people aren't testing things properly as they should. And if you need to add a new feature, something breaks, then you have to fix that test again and stuff. But yeah, you're right. Tests do come as a good way as writing documentation or providing documentation. It's really good, a really good point. Any more questions? Oh, cool.
So when you're trying to take this kind of work you're looking for and turn this into something that can help you get your next step in your career and stuff, do you have suggestions for kind of keeping track of the wins that you have? There's probably a part that you just drop into stuff and go one-to-one to be like, hey, here's what I did. This is great.
Yeah. So when it came to me, I looked for work in the backlog to find something. And then I worked on that continuously throughout my whole junior level time. And so dropping that in the conversation, that's what my one-on-ones are for. They're for talking about my career or talking about personal problems if you're that close with your manager. But overall, I just talk about, look, this is what I'm doing. I want to show you this cool thing. This is a friendly conversation about showing that. And then, but diving into how to turn it in, oh, now that I've owned this, I wanted to talk about how I've learned about this and how I didn't know this before. And because I didn't know this before, now I know better. And so in the future, if things like this come up, I would love for people to ask me questions about it, which makes me more knowledgeable, which makes me feel like I can lead other projects in the future about it because I have experience with this. So it feels like my duties are increasing. So it feels like maybe I should be promoted. I mean, good way to segue into it. I hope people don't feel uncomfortable when it comes to talking about promotions, but it's very common because it's like trying to let you know, I'm trying to prove to you that I deserve this. And here's the evidence. What more do you want, or what more can I define? What more hoops do I have to jump through in order to prove to you that I'm deserving of a promotion or something like that, or a raise, if you would rather. A raise. Sometimes promotion and raises don't come together; come in different ways. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. Any other? All right. Well, thanks for coming.